Hi, I'm John Mayfield, the real estate tech guy, with another Global Real Estate School podcast. Hey, thank you so much for joining the YouTube video and or listening to our podcast. We are continuing our series with USA Mortgage. I'm excited to have Brett Kelly on the phone and on Zoom here with us. Brett, thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
Yeah. So I want everyone to know we have Brett's contact information down below, as well as other information about USA Mortgage, their license number, their equal housing lender, and just all around great people. And so, Brett, it's excited to have you on the call. And I'm really excited because we're going to talk about VA loans, which is kind of neat and a real passion of mine. Story to bring you up to speed. I've had my license since I was 18, 1978. And many of the people watching this podcast or the YouTube video or listening are real estate agents. Sometimes they're newer agents or experienced agents. And to me, you just have to be creative, and there's always ways that you can generate business. So going back to the 1980s, Brett, I got this idea about having a VA home buyers seminar at our office. And I remember we ran some ads and I talked to a loan officer similar to you because I didn't know a
Yeah.
lot about VA loans. And so I would go to somebody like Brett and say, "Hey, I want to do a VA home buyer seminar." We did that seminar, Brett. We had 7 couples show up. That it was like a Thursday night, and Brett, all 7 people purchased homes. Now, they were all veterans. They all had no idea how the process worked. And like, that was so cool to see that happen. Well, I actually did it a few years ago before COVID because I've been doing webinars for a while. We did the same process, but we did it virtually, just like you and I are doing, and recorded it, and then I put that on my website, and I had 2 people show up for that VA seminar, and they both purchased homes. So I'm excited to talk about VA homes, and I only wanted to tell that story that you are available if somebody wants to be creative and do a VA seminar. You can explain how the process works. So tell us a little bit about, let's just pretend like we were doing a VA webinar. What would be the first information you would want to give to consumers who are thinking about a VA loan?
The first thing I always tell people is the VA loan is the best loan program on the market. Um, it has very favorable terms. So if you don't have less than perfect credit, um, the lending standards are a bit lower than conventional loans. So it's a little bit easier to apply and qualify for. Premium rates, the rates are as good as you're going to get on the market. And best of all, it's a program that you can do with no money down. Um,
Exactly. And I think too, you're helping someone who served our country and that's really has an entitlement through, to have this
yeah.
homeownership right. I remember watching a movie several years ago, and it was an old black and white movie, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it was a movie about men and women who came back from the war after World War II, and a lot of them were not able to buy homes, and I think that's kind of when the VA home loan process started to really gain traction and pick up. So it's really good for our veterans. And a lot of people, back years ago when I did that live seminar, we had to actually it was a little challenging for people to get their entitlement or their certificate of eligibility. Today, can you get that online or just go online to do that, or how does that
Oh,
work?
it's incredibly simple these days. So, if a client gives me their date of birth, their full name, and their social security, I can usually have their COE pulled in within minutes from a VA portal, and that's going to allow me to show what entitlement they've used, how much entitlement they still have left, whether they have any disability. Because if you do have any percentage of disability from the VA, then you qualify to actually not only have no money down, but you also qualify to get that VA loan with zero funding fee as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So That's a great point. So help our listeners, and this is good if you're a consumer, you're a veteran listening or watching. I want you to kind of take note of this because this is the key point. Or if you're an agent working with buyers, I have another story. I'm president this year for Missouri Realtors, and my theme is it's your story. So I love to tell stories
You
when I
can tell as
speak
many as
or
you want.
train. Yeah. But I remember, Brett, I felt like I'm using a baseball analogy. I felt like a batter who was striking out and striking out. This is going back into the 1980s, early 90s, late 80s. I just wasn't selling anything. And I got this call and this voice on the other end wanted to buy a home. And we pre-qualified a lot of people back then. So I said, sure, I'd love to help you. Where are you working? And he said, I don't work. I'm on disability. And I was like, okay. But I knew you could not discriminate against someone if they were on disability and they qualified. So I asked this person what their monthly expenses were. And he said, I just have water and utilities, water bill and electric bill. And I said, no, I do well, your credit cards and car payment. He said, no, I don't have any bills, just that. So I quickly pre-qualified him. And I knew that being on disability, he could not be discriminated. So the next step was, did he have a down payment? And he said no. And I thought, oh gosh. And then it dawned on me, Brett. I thought, wonder if he's a veteran. So I said, are you a veteran? And he said, yes, I'm a veteran. And I said, have you ever used your VA entitlement? And he said, no. Well, sure enough, he qualified for a VA loan. And what I did, and I'd like for you to help us kind of understand this process, but I asked the seller to pay all of the closing cost. And at the closing table, they literally got a check for $95 back
Yeah.
because of time they prorated everything. They were crying. They were so happy. They were in their 50s, first home they ever purchased. And he had no idea that he was entitled to a VA loan
Mhm.
through his service. But walk us through that. A lot of times agents don't understand that the seller can actually pay a lot of closing costs for the veteran. So, which enables that little or no down payment.
Yep. So the VA requires no down payment. So the only thing the veteran needs to cover is the closing costs, and those closing costs are going to include the origination fee from your lender, your appraisal fee, your title fees from the title company, and then your escrow setup, which is going to be your homeowner's insurance and your property tax setup. So those are the only thing that the VA member actually has to pay for themselves. Now, depending on the market, there is opportunity that you could get a lender credit to help pay for some of those, or as you said, a seller credit where the seller could actually pay for those costs as
Right.
well.
Right. Now, have you seen any agents using any creative, um, I'm trying to think of the word, creative negotiating strategies because we've been in this really robust, active market and with multiple offers. Sometimes, unfortunately, the VA or FHA loan submissions or contract submissions may not look as favorably. I've mentioned on this broadcast that as an agent, you have to work with that veteran, figure out ways that can make because if they're competing against another offer, maybe the veteran could say, look, I'll let them have 30 or 60 days to get out after closing. Check with your broker or manager, make sure that you follow all the paperwork and policy in your office. But sometimes that extended possession might look more attractive and make your veteran offer look much better. Have you seen any agents and how they're using a VA loan contingency to be attractive to a seller? Or I know that's a challenging question, but I was just
Yeah,
curious if you had.
for sure. So the only stipulation the VA has is the veteran or the veteran spouse needs to occupy the home within 60 days.
Okay.
That gives you 59 days that you could offer a lease back or allow them to stay rent
Exactly.
free. I've seen them say you can stay here 59 days rent free while you search for your house. et cetera, to make their offer a little more attractive.
Exactly. And if you follow the paperwork, and I know some people may say, oh, 30 days or 59 days, but I as I said earlier, I've had my license since 1978. It was just a common practice for many, many years that the seller always had 30 days after closing. And quite frankly, Brett, I had less problems with issues after the closing when when the seller had 30 days. I think it's because they just had time to really clean, do all the
Yep.
things they wanted to do before they turned the keys over. But so it's not, I mean, it's something that's been done. And again, I want you to check with your broker or manager because there are forms you would have to submit. But that's a great way to position your contract if your borrower needs to go VA, to just give them some opportunity when those contracts are presented. Well, let's also mention the fact, and help me with this. Some people might say, well, I've only served in the National Guard, or but there are people, even service in the National Guard counts for VA loan, and there are some spouses or benefits for people if they've had someone who's passed away. Do you know, or can you help us with some of
Correct.
those
So
questions?
you can qualify if you've served in the National Guard long enough. Same with the Coast Guard now. So there's different time frames for those than active military, but you can qualify, um, and you can use a surviving spouse can apply to use the eligibility of their passed away spouse.
Okay, great. And the other very cool benefit, and this is one item that I get confused on. Hopefully, you can help me out. But sometimes people will get a VA loan and maybe they've sold their house, or perhaps they haven't sold it, and they think that, oh gosh, I've already used my VA benefit, I can never use it again. Walk us through that whole process, because just because you get one VA loan, if you've paid that off, you can still use that again, correct?
Correct. So
Or
there's
sometimes you could have two VA loans going, I guess.
correct. So you can there's two questions here. So first, if you've sold your house, um, your eligibility will be reinstated
Okay.
100%. So if you sell your house, and you haven't foreclosed upon that house, then your eligibility is reinstated like you've never had one before. Now,
Okay,
let's
good.
say you've lived in your house for 2 years, and you would like to buy a second house and rent that, because if you've lived in your VA loan for 2 years, you can then turn it into an investment property. Um, then you can actually have two VA loans by applying for what's called a bonus entitlement.
Okay.
In order to see what you qualify for, you need your certificate of eligibility or your COE. Um, and by looking at what dollars of eligibility you have used, which equates to about 25% of your original loan amount, and then looking at the county loan limit of where you're looking to buy your second home, then I, or a qualified VA lender, can then do the mathematical equation of how much eligibility you have left and how much would be required for the second, and see if you would qualify for a second VA loan. And it's
Okay,
usually
great.
not a question of whether you qualify for a second, but the second one may require a small down payment.
Excellent. Okay.
Mhm.
And keep in mind, folks, as down below in the show notes, I'm going to have Brett's contact information. That's why you need to have a good loan officer, someone you can, a company like USA Mortgage you can trust, and someone like Brett. So you can go to them as an agent or even a consumer. You're welcome to call Brett and just ask those questions, because sometimes you might be able to keep the existing property you have as an investment property
Mhm.
and still go out and purchase another property. And there again, if that's your plan, using that possession as the negotiating chip. I mean, if you're going to keep that home as investment property anyway, you could provide that little extra benefit or bonus to, make a lower offer, submit an offer if it's a pretty robust market to where your offer could be a little bit more attractive. So very good.
Yeah, and
And then
it's one of
go
the
ahead.
nice perks of my job is I work with a lot of active military, and as you know, our active military are moved on average about every 2 to 3 years. And
Right.
VA loan with this the way it's set up really is a great way for them to build wealth.
It
I
is.
it's not uncommon for me to talk with a service member who's been active 12, 10, 15 years and is on their third or fourth VA loan and has, 3 or 4 investment properties. And if you think about it, if you buy a home with a VA loan at every stop on your active duty, you buy a home, you get transferred, you use your bonus entitlement. Now you have two. 3 years later, you get moved to Alaska, you buy a third. Now that would require you to refinance that first one into a conventional loan. So now you're still holding two. But
Right.
you can imagine how if you do this strategically with no money down, how you can build this pretty elaborate wealth creating portfolio, um, all as a benefit of your service.
Exactly. That's right. And of course, please know Brett or I or anyone at USA Mortgage or Global Real Estate School, we have no idea what could happen with the
Mhm.
market. However, just in my own personal experience, at one time I had around 20 rental properties and I sold most of those off just because I got tired
Yeah.
of rentals and too many irons in the fire, I guess you could say. But, some of those properties, Brett, that I own today, I'm using my calculator and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, if I had just held on to some of those properties," because property values tend to increase, not
Mhm.
always. I've seen markets where they've dropped down, but the rental market can still always be a necessity for many people. And, all of the reports and information that I hear out of the National Association of Realtors for several years is that we have this shortage of supply of properties, and that's what's causing a lot of these multiple offers. But anyway, if you're interested in investment property, it is a great way to build wealth. We never want to promise anything, but we
Yeah.
always want to encourage you to talk to your legal and tax folks, and they can direct you the right way. However, to segue into that, a lot of people don't realize, Brett, that they could buy a duplex or a 3 or 4 family. And is the requirement that the veteran has to live in one of the units?
Correct. So if they buy
Okay.
a multifamily property, they can buy up to 4 units. They must occupy one, and then they can rent out the other 2 or 3 or 4 units.
Yeah,
And
I think that's just
they can even use some of that rental income to qualify if they have a property manager in place. They can use some of that anticipated income to help them qualify as well.
yeah, and so, there's so many creative things to do, like that and to think about that, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, talk to your CPA or your
Mhm.
tax attorney, but, I mean, I recently took I when I sold my houses that I was mentioning to you, I took a home in as a 1030 on a 1031 exchange and rented it out for several years. And then my wife and I ended up, we'd sold some other properties. We moved into that rental property because the renters had moved out, fixed it up. It was a smaller home, but we thought, you know what, we'll just stay here for a while, which we did and ended up staying there for about 7 years. And then we recently sold it. Well, I paid no capital gains tax because under the current tax laws, I was able to, even though I had an investment property for several years, I was able to sell it, pay no capital gains tax because it was my personal residence. And I just want any consumers who might be listening to just always talk to your legal and tax people about that. And tax laws change. But as a VA, as a veteran, you might be able to sell your existing home, requalify for a um, a VA mortgage and invest into a multifamily
Mhm.
and check all the rules out. And Brett can give you
Oh
those
yeah.
requirements. But what a great way to build wealth and to have additional income. So very cool. Now I want to ask you the process. So we have to get that certificate of eligibility
Mhm.
first. That's going to help you get the groundwork going for pre-qualifying them. You would then look at their current debt and expenses, their income, and then be able to say, based on the information I have, and based on your certificate of eligibility, which they call a COE, here's how much you qualify for. So you're going to go out with an agent, then hopefully, or maybe you found something on your own, find a property that you write a contract on. At that point, Brett, you will then order an appraisal, but what comes back is what's called a certificate of now the certificate of value, right? COV.
NOV.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
NOV, which
Mhm.
stands for,
You would ask me that.
yeah. Well, what comes back, the VA has a different
Yep.
name for the value of the property,
Correct.
but, and that's okay. We'll, one of the things we like about our conversations is we want to be very transparent. But once the appraisal comes back, at that point, you're able to then look at that. But on the VA appraisal, they're going to look at things a little bit closer than a normal appraisal. Or how does that differ, a VA appraisal versus a normal appraisal?
So a conventional appraisal is simply concerned with um, value. So a conventional loan, the appraiser is going to go out and determine what they value the home at. So this home is valued according to comparables or homes
Right.
like it at $350,000. And that's all they're going to tell you is what the value of the home is. The VA, to protect their veterans, um, is also going to look for minimal safety and health standards. So, what that might mean is they're going to look for rotting wood around doorways or floors that might be rotted, that might be a rot hazard, trip hazard. So, a hardwood floor piece that's bubbled up that might be a trip hazard. A railing around a stair that doesn't exist or maybe is loose and falling apart. A window that's broken, or peeling paint that could be lead paint.
Okay.
So these are not things, they're not looking deep into the house for plumbing issues. They're simply looking for something that could be a minimal standard issue that needs to be repaired to protect the veteran from buying a house that might have some issues.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I just wanted our viewers and listeners to know that the VA appraisal is going to be a little step above. I always kind of think of versus a normal appraisal because there are certain things VA wants them to check off that may not necessarily be looked at under a traditional appraisal.
But the one thing that I like to point out is a misconception is that the valuation is different, which it's not. They both use the same valuation approach. So both conventional and VA appraisals in theory should be both coming in at the same dollar amount.
Right.
It's not that they're judging it in a different way. They're still using the same comparables to judge what the value of the home. They just may notate a few repairs that may be necessary in order to get the loan closed.
Gotcha. And then the only thing that sometimes pops up is the seller will generally have to provide that termite inspection and pay for that, correct? And so,
That has
uh,
recently been changed.
oh, it has.
The
Okay.
veteran can now pay for their own termite. So in the past, you was always required in certain states. Not all states have termites, believe it or not. Um,
Okay.
so not all states require a termite inspection, but the states that it's required, you have to get a termite inspection. If there's evidence of termites, then you need evidence that they have been treated. And in the past, the seller had, or really anyone but the veteran had to pay for
Okay.
that. And they've
Okay.
loosened up that rule as recently as this year to where the veteran can actually pay for that termite inspection. And it's $79 to $100, somewhere around there typically.
Okay. Right. It's not a huge
No.
cost. Great. All right. And then I guess the last question I'll ask you is we hear sometimes about the time or the delay because everything needs to go through VA, correct? Where many times you have an underwriter at USA Mortgage you can write off or approve. How does that differ with the VA loan?
It does not actually. So we
Okay.
underwrite a loan just like we would a conventional loan. We use the same automated underwriting system, whether it's DU or LP. We run our findings through the same software system as we would a conventional loan. We underwrite them in house just like we would a conventional loan. Um, and typically, as long as the appraisal comes back quickly, we can typically close them just as fast as a conventional loan, if not faster. Sometimes
Thank you.
faster, believe it or not, because
Yeah.
a VA appraisal is actually transferable. So
Okay.
if you come to me halfway through the loan process and your lender drops the ball and you want to change lenders, I can actually use the appraisal that the other lender ordered because it's mandated by the VA that they can transfer it over.
Gotcha.
So there are instances where you maybe switch lenders that it's actually going to be quicker because under conventional loans, you typically would have to order a new appraisal. So
Very good.
yeah,
Good.
typically we can close them just as fast as conventional or FHA or any other program.
Wonderful. And I ask you that question because a lot of times I have people say, oh, but it has to go down here and over there. And I knew that you do a lot of that right in house. So um, I've seen VA loans close very quickly. So don't let that be a stumbling block when if
We
you're
get them
looking at
closed
an
in
offer or
we get them closed in 21, 22, 23 days all the time.
so Brett's approved in 14 different states that he can help in, and we'll have his contact information down below. As I mentioned, you'll be able to call him and just ask him and tell him your situation. If you are an agent, check with Brett and find out how he can help you provide some ideas for creating
Mhm.
VA opportunities as we've had on some of our other broadcasts. And if you haven't watched them on the USA, be sure and check out our playlist under USA Mortgage. They provide so many cool resources for real estate agents. They have their own printing press. I think someone said it's referred to as the beast, or I can't remember, but think outside the box. There are many apartment dwellings, and guess what? There's a lot of people living in those apartments who are veterans. You could send out a postcard introducing yourself, just explaining, hey, if you're tired of renting and you want to own a home, we have some great loan products available through USA Mortgage. Brett could help you out and their team to design a card. But I'm telling you what, targeting veterans and explaining to them the opportunity they have to get a VA loan can just be a huge gold mine, not to mention the gratification and just the wonderful feeling you have by helping people who've served our country be able to become homeowners. So
Yeah.
Brett, this has been wonderful. I've learned a lot today too. I'm really glad the seller does not have to pay for that termite inspection. And that's why you need somebody like Brett that you can go to and that'll keep you up to date on this kind of information, because the laws change all the time. And we might have talked about something on this call, but it could be totally different in 6 months. So visit Brett, check with him below. And anything you want to add, Brett, before we close?
No, we're good. I appreciate you for your time and allowing me
Yeah,
to speak
thank
about
you.
something I'm passionate about.
Yeah, thank you. I think you said about 80% of your loans you close are
Correct.
VA loans. So
Mhm.
very, very neat. And I really like that. Well, check out everyone at USA Mortgage, all of our videos. Be sure and give Brett a call. He'll be glad to help you. And if he can't help you in a state that you're watching this in, he will get you with the right USA Mortgage loan
Correct.
officer who can. They're approved in 49 states as of this recording. And again, we'll have all their information down below and at the end. But Brett, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for watching and or listening to the podcast. Go out, make it a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the podcast for Global Real Estate School. I'm John Mayfield, the Real Estate Tech Guy. Go out and make it a great day.
Topics discussed on this podcast are for informational purposes only and are not a commitment to lend. Additional terms and conditions apply. Interest rates and products are subject to change without notice and may or may not be available at time of commitment or lock-in. DAS Acquisition Company LLC is not affiliated with or endorsed by any government entity or agency, including the USDA, HUD, or VA. DAS Acquisition Company LLC, doing business as USA Mortgage, MLS number 227262, Equal Housing Opportunity.